Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Teen Wolf Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama picks up right where the last season left off. The werewolf Derek has killed his alpha werewolf uncle Peter and has ascended as the new alpha. Jackson finally got his wish. He burst out of the water, touching the bite marks on his abdomen, feeling reborn. Meanwhile, the high schooler Scott was running and leaping through the forest, venting his anger. Hunter Chris had forbidden him from seeing his daughter Allison. He had spent a lifetime hunting werewolves and couldn't stand the idea of a werewolf winning over his daughter. Coming out of his memories, Scott sped back to the town. He dashed through the streets and leapt into Allison's bedroom. Though they knew they shouldn't meet, they often snuck around for secret rendezvous, enjoying each other in private. Scott's best friend, Stiles, was standing guard outside Lydia's room, who was injured by the werewolf previously. Her father was wary, thinking Stiles seemed unreliable. At that moment, Stiles was in the midst of a daydream. Scott, using his heightened werewolf senses, detected Allison's parents approaching and hid just in time. Allison's mother, ever suspicious, inspected the room thoroughly. Luckily, Scott was hiding outside the window, proving he was quite skilled at sneaking around like a true rogue. Lydia woke up and went to the bathroom to wash. The bite on her stomach hadn't healed, indicating she hadn't turned into a werewolf. Black liquid started to gush from the bathtub, turning the water pitch black. Lydia noticed something was wrong and touched the drain, pulling out strands of black hair. She started to sob like a giant baby, thinking it was her own hair. Suddenly, a decayed hand emerged from the black water. Lydia screamed in a chicken voice, and Stiles and the others rushed in, only to find Lydia missing and her clothes gone. Everything that had just happened might have been a hallucination, and the bloody arm likely belonged to Peter. The quiet town was suddenly pierced by a sharp scream. While sneaking around, Scott recognized it as Lydia's voice, even though it was miles away. Police arrived at the hospital to gather information. When the sheriff asked about Lydia's specific characteristics, her father hadn't even spoken before Stiles detailed every feature of his crush. He thoroughly embarrassed his father, who urged him to go home. Stiles stole Lydia's smelly clothes, asking Scott to track her scent. At that moment, Allison arrived, saying that the hunters were on the move. If Lydia harmed anyone, they might shoot her without hormone mercy. The three needed to find Lydia before anyone else did. While searching, Allison informed them that more family members had arrived, supposedly for the funeral of Chris's sister, Kate, who was killed by Peter for revenge. The camera pans to a cemetery where a man named Isaac is operating an excavator. Digging graves late at night in a cemetery is quite something. He hears rustling nearby and scans the area, spotting a clawed hand. Suddenly, a shadow rushes at him, knocking over the excavator. He falls into the pit he was digging and is filled with dread. He gets up and peeks out, seeing the creature digging up graves. Moments later, a goose roar echoes from behind, scaring the grave-digging monster away. The cemetery falls silent again, and the excavator is mysteriously set upright. It's Derek, the new alpha werewolf. It turns out, while Derek was eager to build his pack, Isaac found Derek because he also wanted to become a werewolf. Scott and the two arrive near an old house but lose Lydia's scent. Scott theorizes that Lydia might be looking for the alpha wolf. When werewolves form a pack, each member gets stronger, with the alpha benefiting the most. That's why Peter has always wanted to form a pack. Nearby, Stiles finds a tripwire. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he triggers a trap, hoisting Scott into the air. The trap was set by hunters. Allison and Stiles quickly hide. Chris and his crew arrive, and seeing it's Scott, don't trouble him. However, Chris warns Scott to stay out of trouble, or even he won't be able to protect him. The grave robbery attracts the police. The gravedigger Isaac is there with his abusive, sharp-tongued father. Derek's figure appears briefly, seemingly warning Isaac about what to say and what not to say. The sheriff asks what the grave robbers took. Isaac says it was a liver. Lydia becomes the prime suspect. Stiles is incredulous but defends her, saying, "What's the harm in stealing a dead man's liver?" Scott asserts he's never eaten liver, showing self-control. Stiles retorts that it's more like his lust is overpowering his beastly nature, turning him into a well-behaved dog whenever he thinks of Allison. After being bitten by Derek, the lacrosse team captain Jackson regains his confidence and is eagerly awaiting his transformation into a werewolf on the next full moon. Feeling smug, he generously gives a homeless man $1 after being complimented on his car, only to call security to shoo him away. Isaac is also on the team, though he's quiet and unassuming. The quirky coach gathers all the players, informing them about a girl's naked disappearance. With the night's temperature dropping, he urges everyone to show some hormone mercy and help the police find her naked body. The players are taken aback, but the coach promises an A for anyone who signs up to search. Scott and Stiles approach Jackson, hoping he can help find Lydia since she's his ex-girlfriend. Jackson, however, coldly refuses. During the chemistry test, it was the girly man Dany who pointed out that Jackson had a diabetic nosebleed. Panicking, Jackson rushed to the restroom, trying to wipe away the black blood with tissues. This black and diabetic blood indicated that something had gone wrong with Jackson's transformation. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a strong hand yanked Jackson out. It was Derek, there to check on Jackson's progress. Derek was eager to build his own pack, but upon seeing the black blood coming from Jackson's ears, his enthusiasm vanished. With clear disdain, Derek bluntly stated that Jackson's body was rejecting the transformation. To Derek, Jackson was useless now, so he left abruptly, not very alpha-like behavior. After the exam, Stiles was asked to stay behind by the chemistry teacher. Alone with Stiles, the teacher made it clear that during the arson investigation, Stiles' sheriff father had gone out of his way to treat him badly. Now, the chemistry teacher intended to focus all his strict attention on Stiles, making him enjoy rigorous treatment as payback. It was petty revenge, punishing Stiles for his father's actions. Kate's funeral was a grand affair. Allison overheard from her parents that someone had insisted on such an elaborate ceremony. Among the onlookers was a schoolmate of Allison's, snapping photos of her from beyond the barrier. Suddenly, an old hand blocked the camera lens. The elderly man took the camera and crushed the memory card with one hand, drawing everyone's attention. This man was no ordinary person. His bald presence was commanding, complete with an almost palpable background music. Even Chris had to show him respect. The man's name was Gerard, the godfather of hunters and Allison's grandfather. Even from a distance, Scott could sense the lethal aura emanating from him. Soon after, the sheriff had caught the two and dragged them away, only to hear over his radio that there had been a murder in Beacon Hills woods. After the report, he noticed the two had vanished again. Later that night, Scott and Stiles arrived at the crime scene. Inside an ambulance lay a bloody corpse. Scott caught Lydia's scent at the scene. For the first time, Stiles earnestly pleaded with Scott to find Lydia. While searching, Scott spotted a figure and shifted into wolf form to pursue it. He discovered it wasn't Lydia, but an unfamiliar werewolf, dressed like a school janitor. The werewolf lunged at Scott, who easily subdued him using his werewolf muscles. On the other side of town, a naked Lydia finally appeared, shivering and terrified. She only snapped out of her daze when Stiles called out to her. Stiles wanted to give her a coat to cover her sexy body, but he was so shocked that his legs gave way and he fell over. His father could only shake his head in exasperation. Given the naked chance, Stiles still couldn't manage to take full use of it. Scott was determined to find out the origins of the rogue werewolf, so he continued his pursuit. Unexpectedly, the homeless werewolf stepped into a hunter's trap. Just as Scott was about to help, Derek stopped him as the hunters had arrived. Leading them was none other than Gerard, the godfather of hunters. The homeless werewolf was electrocuted back into human form, frantically claiming he hadn't killed anyone and was just seeking the Alpha's protection. It turned out he was an Omega, the weakest type of werewolf without a pack. Gerard drew his sacred sword, intending to send a message to all werewolves by executing the Omega. He wanted to show that no Omega could survive alone. The brutal act known as hemicorporectomy was indeed real. Gerard's strength and ruthlessness were terrifying even to Scott. Derek wanted Scott to understand the grim fate awaiting werewolves without a pack. This was the beginning of a war between humans and werewolves. Chris tried to remind his father Gerard to follow the rules, but Gerard dismissed him, saying that ever since Kate's death, there were no rules. Now, they would wait to find bisected bodies, regardless of their condition or innocence. Gerard was even more ruthless and insane than his daughter, Kate. Later at dinner, Isaac nervously reported his grades to his father. For just one failing grade, his father put down his knife and fork, claiming he wasn't angry but still insisting on some punishment, making Isaac wash the dishes and clean the kitchen. Such a lenient punishment made Isaac feel relieved, but the next moment, his father threw his glass and smashed a plate, sarcastically telling Isaac to clean up properly. Isaac couldn't believe it as he pulled glass shards from his face, while his father mocked him, saying he deserved it. Miraculously, Isaac's wounds healed on their own. He had received the Alpha's gift and was now a werewolf. His father was stunned. Realizing his new abilities, Isaac ran out of the house. His abusive father chased after him by car, an event witnessed by Jackson, who was taking out the trash. Jackson had miraculously survived and wasn't bleeding to death. In the pouring rain, Isaac's father found his bike in an alley and saw a figure through his rain-speckled glasses. The figure slowly crouched down, and the frightened father ran back to his car. The creature followed, ripped off the car door with one hand, and killed Isaac's father in a gruesome manner. Indeed, abusers often meet a fitting end. On the other side of town, Allison and Scott were meeting secretly in the woods. Scott was a bit nervous, worried that Allison's grandfather Gerard would find out about them. Luckily, her father Chris was a decent guy and hadn't revealed Scott's identity. Allison reassured Scott, saying her grandfather won't separate them, but Scott was still anxious, believing that Gerard just wanted to separate his body from his head. The two shifted their topic and began wrestling their juicy tongues again. Meanwhile, the hunters were on the move. Chris, following Gerard's orders, approached the school principal. The poor principal was tied up in a car while Allison's mother unilaterally declared the principal fired. The principal protested, saying she had no authority to fire him. Allison's mother pulled out a gun and said she could torment him. Elsewhere, a panicked Isaac sought out Derek, saying something had happened to his father. Derek asked what he had done, and Isaac replied it was that thing that did it. The next day, Scott asked Stiles to prepare something stronger than handcuffs for the full moon night to prevent himself from losing control. Stiles, being a good friend, had already prepared. He then showed him a long chain. Just then, their goofy coach walked by, giving them a strange look. He told them to take care of their bodies because he knew this was going to be 100 times worse than anything he could imagine. The two were left speechless. While packing up the chain, Scott suddenly sensed another werewolf on the team. Isaac in the corner also noticed him. When Lydia returned, she couldn't remember anything about her disappearance. She was surprisingly upbeat, having lost 9 pounds. Everyone looked at Lydia strangely. A girl wandering naked in the forest for 2 days wasn't something normal people did. Allison comforted her, saying maybe it's just because she lost 9 pounds. On the field, Scott used practice to try and identify the other werewolf. He took Dany's position as goalie, frequently crossing the line and knocking over players in line to shoot, then sniffing them intensely like a weirdo. The coach was furious, swearing up a storm while the players trembled. The coach demanded to know what was going on. Stiles blamed it on failing grades and social anxiety. Meanwhile, Scott knocked Dany over, their positions awkward. The coach had seen enough. Being knocked over and groped was too much. Finally, it was Isaac's turn. As a newcomer, he hadn't yet mastered control over his transformations, making him easily angered. Scott collided with him, and they both knelt, recognizing each other's identities. Just then, the police arrived. Isaac was a suspect in his father's brutal death and was to be detained for 24 hours. Unfortunately, that night was a full moon. Scott was deeply worried that Isaac could cause a massacre. Later, Stiles and Scott overheard that Jackson had reported Isaac, having witnessed the abuse and providing a motive for patricide. Caught eavesdropping, they were shocked to see the new principal was none other than Gerard, the godfather of hunters. Lydia mistakenly thought Jackson had saved her, so she approached him to offer her body as a gratitude. However, Jackson was adamant about not rekindling past relationships. Before leaving, Jackson kindly warned Lydia not to go out tonight because it's a full moon. Jackson fancied himself a potential werewolf. After school, Derek approached Scott with a request regarding Isaac. Scott couldn't ignore it. Chris reported his investigation results to Gerard. Based on the brutal scene at the crime site, it was undoubtedly the work of a werewolf, but there was no evidence implicating Isaac. The old man took a pill and declared he didn't care who the killer was. He just wanted to know if that kid was a werewolf. If he was, he must be killed. Chris was displeased, advising his father that pure genocide wasn't the solution, but his father ignored his bullshit. Allison overheard their conversation. Jackson, wanting to record his transformation, rented a camera from his classmate Matt, who had a crush on Allison. Matt asked about Jackson's intentions, but Jackson said he would use it to witness history. Jackson's narcissism was evident, and Matt left, his curiosity piqued. Meanwhile, Derek and Scott went to investigate Isaac's house. Derek's instincts told him Isaac hadn't killed his father. In the basement, they found a freezer with scratch marks inside. Isaac, a victim of his father's abuse, would lock himself in there to control his transformations. The boy's willpower was remarkable. Under Gerard's orders, a man in a police uniform hurriedly left, suggesting the hunters had infiltrated various sectors. Allison noticed him holding something and intended to inform Scott, but was stopped by her father, who wanted to discuss Lydia. Allison later told Stiles about it. Clever Stiles quickly deduced that the police officer was a hunter targeting Isaac, and he had taken wolfsbane. Scott criticized Derek for recklessly recruiting others, putting Isaac in danger despite gaining power. Derek argued that Isaac was willing, and with the hunters declaring war, he needed to build a pack. Derek urged Scott to join, but Scott refused, not wanting to be away from Allison. He added that he just wanted to save Isaac because he's innocent. Jackson set up his camera, admiring his perfect physique in the mirror, imagining his transformation. Allison, to stall the police hunter, shot arrows at him, buying Stiles some time. Meanwhile, Allison learned from Stiles that Scott was at Isaac's house, so she went there. She found Scott on the brink of losing control. The full moon transformation was unlike any before. Only powerful alpha wolves could maintain control, while ordinary werewolves couldn't. Allison locked her boyfriend in the freezer for safety, wrapping chains around it for good measure. Outside the police station, Stiles and Derek unexpectedly crossed paths, becoming an amusing duo. Stiles' goofy nature rubbed off on Derek. Derek was unimpressed by Stiles' plan to use a pretty boy strategy. He reluctantly flirted with the female officer on duty, while Stiles snuck into the holding cell, only to find the hunters had beaten him to it. The cell door was broken, and it was empty. Suddenly, werewolf Isaac lunged out, knocking the hunter unconscious. Derek crushed the wolfsbane vial. Isaac was bloodthirsty, but dared not challenge Derek, who was even untransformed. Instead, he targeted Stiles. Derek roared, saying, "Stiles is under his protection." Isaac cowered in the corner, trembling under the alpha wolf's dominance. Allison returned to the living room to keep watch. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down through her spine to her smelly butt. She cautiously glanced toward the corner and saw a humanoid creature staring at her, its eyes glowing gold. Allison's scream reached Scott's ears, filling him with anxiety. He struggled desperately to break free from his restraints. Allison faced off against the creature. It didn't resemble a werewolf. In the darkness, she could only make out its silhouette and golden eyes. Its heavy growl was terrifying. Despite her initial panic, Allison quickly drew her knife to fight. At that moment, the basement door was kicked open. A young wolf rolled into the room, positioning himself protectively in front of Allison. The creature had climbed onto the ceiling. As they got a clearer view, they saw it was covered in keratin scales and had a mouth full of sharp, dense teeth. It was a lizard-like monster. Both were shocked as the creature fled. They realized that this monster was the true killer of Isaac's father. The sheriff, hearing about the disturbance, rushed over to check. He was astonished to find his own son there. Stiles claimed that Isaac was responsible for the attack. When Jackson woke up, he eagerly checked the video recording. His expression turned sour, and he eventually threw the camera in a rage. The footage showed nothing unusual. He had slept soundly through the night without transforming, even on the full moon. Jackson's dream of becoming a werewolf was shattered. The video also cleared Jackson of suspicion for being the lizard creature, making Lydia the prime suspect. The scene shifts to Allison, who was refueling her car, but was taken away by a kidnapper. When she regained consciousness, she found herself in the old werewolf mansion, with her father also bound nearby. Struggling fiercely, she managed to break free from her chair. The kidnapper then emerged, and Allison quickly realized this was a test set by her father. Chris explained to his daughter that in their hunter family, men were trained as warriors and women were groomed to be leaders. Handing Allison a camera, Chris instructed her to free herself. It took Allison 2.5 hours to escape. The kidnapper, guarding outside, encouraged her by saying it had taken him 3 hours initially. After Allison left, the kidnapper also prepared to depart, but was tripped by a tail and then scratched on the neck. Though not fatal, the injury left him paralyzed. The kidnapper had barely made an appearance before meeting his end. The next morning, the school organized a rock climbing activity. Scott took the opportunity to flirt with Allison, deliberately lagging half a step behind to admire the view. During training, a girl named Erica, who was afraid of heights, broke down in tears and left amidst ridicule. After school, the stubborn girl attempted the climb alone, without a safety rope. In the locker room, Scott suddenly sensed someone else's suffering. Halfway up the climb, Erica had a seizure. She struggled to breathe and convulsed uncontrollably. At the critical moment, Scott arrived and caught her, awakening a new ability. Erica was then taken to the hospital. While waiting for the doctor, she was secretly taken by Derek, who bit her and injected his saliva. While studying vaccination methods, Jackson had a sudden revelation. Lydia showed no changes after being bitten by the alpha wolf, indicating she was immune to the wolf toxin. He blamed Lydia for his own inability to transform. Frustrated, Jackson angrily confronted Lydia, who was left bewildered and hurt by his outburst. She went to the bathroom to cry, only to notice a figure outside the door. The figure had large, deformed feet, clearly not those of a woman. Curious, Lydia followed the familiar silhouette. It was the former alpha wolf Peter, who seemed to have somehow survived. The figure paused to stare at a trophy on the honor wall before quickly leaving. Lydia discovered the name on the trophy was Peter's. It seemed his ghost was haunting her, suggesting she might be part of his plan. Meanwhile, Stiles approached his classmate Boyd, and after some bargaining, he managed to get the keys to the ice rink. He and Scott planned to invite Allison and another girl for some ice skating after school. At that moment, everyone in the cafeteria turned to look at the entrance. The sickly Erica had transformed into a stunning beauty. Scott and Stiles hurried after her, only to see her get into Derek's car. Derek had found himself a new recruit. Stiles was dumbfounded, and Scott was furious. He believed Derek's irresponsible recruitment was reckless. Scott brought his frustration to work, where the vet noticed something was wrong and patiently talked to him. Scott knew the vet's identity was special since he had once scared off the alpha wolf Peter. Trying to discuss his concerns, Scott was instead drawn into a negotiation about prices by the vet, who skillfully shifted the topic. By the end of their conversation, Scott's mood had lifted, though the vet's true nature remained a mystery. After school, Scott and his friends met at the ice rink. Stiles hinted to Lydia that some people might seem unsuitable at first, but turn out to be perfect together. Lydia agreed, saying Scott and Allison made a great pair. Stiles was left wondering if Lydia was rejecting him or just oblivious. Confident in his werewolf abilities, Scott believed he would excel at skating, only to be quickly proven wrong. Stiles hoped to impress Lydia, but was stunned to learn she was a professional-level skater, making her even more appealing. Scott's clumsy attempts were laughable. After all, he was a prairie wolf, not an ice wolf. As they skated, Scott noticed that a werewolf's eyes would overexpose photos. Meanwhile, Lydia experienced another hallucination involving Wolfsbane and the trapped Peter, causing her to scream. Her piercing scream suggested she might be evolving into a banshee, leaving the group both worried and puzzled. Scott later confronted Erica, asking who Derek's next recruit would be. Derek needed at least 3 beta wolves to form a pack. With Isaac and Erica already turned, Derek needed one more. Erica suggested that Scott could be the third. Scott pressed her for an answer, but Erica shared her own bullying experiences, revealing how she was ridiculed for her epilepsy, which was even posted online. She wet herself from the stress, and becoming a werewolf felt like a blessing to her, not a burden. Allison became concerned. Scott couldn't let Erica's words sway him. He talked to Allison, who urged him to stay away from Derek's pack, saying that since her grandfather arrived in town, Derek had been rapidly forming his pack, escalating tensions towards a human-werewolf conflict. Allison didn't want Scott involved, but he felt compelled to help Isaac and Erica, believing they were innocent. Allison left, upset. Stiles then found Scott, revealing that Boyd was the only one absent from school that day, making him Derek's likely next target. The two split up, with Scott heading to the ski resort to search, while Stiles went to Boyd's house for answers. While tidying up her room, Allison's mother found a love letter from Scott and became angry after reading it. Heading to the kitchen, she picked up a knife and deliberately cut her arm. She did it to have an excuse to visit Scott's nurse mother and inquire about Scott's current situation. It was an extreme method, and she didn't even use anesthesia. Feeling lost, Jackson went to Derek's old house, demanding answers. When no one responded, the furious teenager broke in, only to find himself facing Chris's gun for the second time. Jackson really was out of his depth. Chris was there investigating the brutal death of his subordinate. He warned Jackson to stop obsessing over dangerous pursuits that could get him killed. Stiles drove to Boyd's house, only to find Erica waiting outside, confirming that Boyd was Derek's next target. This realization made Stiles nervous. With the new werewolves being volatile and unpredictable, Stiles decided to play dumb and leave, but Erica dismantled his car and knocked him out with a single punch. Later that evening, the vet discovered that someone had broken into his veterinary clinic. On the operating table lay a corpse with its chest clawed open. Chris was the intruder. The vet reminded him that this was a pet clinic, to which Chris replied that he knew he was more than just a vet. At the ice rink, Boyd was maintaining the ice when Scott approached him, telling him that Derek hadn't revealed everything. Boyd claimed he knew about the hunters and the dangers involved. Scott tried to persuade him, saying there were better people to befriend than Derek. However, Derek and his pack appeared behind him. Isaac and Erica, now werewolves, were annoyingly cocky, typical of Derek's recruits. Derek, now a small-time boss, looked down on Scott, who had missed his chance to join him. Scott couldn't let Boyd be dragged into Derek's schemes. Determined, he faced off against Derek's pack. Isaac and Erica attacked, but Scott managed to fight them off. He tried to make them see that Derek was using them, making them feel empowered while turning them into guard dogs. Defeated, Isaac and Erica fell back and Derek stepped in. As an alpha, his blood-red eyes and sharp claws were intimidating. Scott instinctively retreated, losing the upper hand. Derek attacked ruthlessly, but Scott still had the courage to fight back, unlike Isaac, who cowered under Derek's roar. Amused by Scott's spirit, Derek rewarded him with a brutal punch to the jaw. The fight ended with Scott's defeat, but he continued to argue with Boyd, urging him not to become like Derek's lackeys. Boyd, however, wanted to be like Scott. He lifted his shirt to reveal a bite mark. Scott realized his efforts were in vain. Boyd was already bitten. With Boyd's transformation, Derek's pack was finally complete. On the other side of town, Stiles woke up in a trash bin, cursing under his breath. Meanwhile, Scott's abdominal wounds weren't healing, prompting the vet to explain that they were inflicted by an alpha werewolf. It was then Scott noticed the corpse on the operating table, and the vet said they needed to talk about this. Jackson, feeling defeated, was practicing alone on the field, trying to unleash the werewolf strength he couldn't attain while others seemed to gain it effortlessly. True strength like Scott's comes from within. But Jackson, with his weak and greedy heart, was struggling. His car got stuck in the mud, and as he floundered, the contrast between his past glory and current humiliation was stark. In a fit of rage, he tried to lift his pickup truck and actually succeeded, going from disbelief to ecstatic joy. The vet treated Scott's injuries. Scott had many questions about the horribly mangled corpse. The vet anxiously explained that the Hunter family would arrive soon. They possessed a monster manual that documented information about many shapeshifters. Before long, the Hunters arrived. Scott hurriedly hid. The Hunter godfather, Gerard, had known the vet for a long time. Surprisingly, the vet seemed somewhat nervous in front of this old man. Analyzing the wounds on the corpse, the vet deduced the monster's attack patterns. The post-mortem wounds were incredibly precise, almost at the level of surgical precision. The creature had injected a paralyzing toxin into the prey's spine in one strike. The claw marks on the chest were the fatal wounds. The monster had inserted its claws, pulled out the lungs, and then torn open the chest cavity. This monster's strength and ferocity far exceeded that of werewolves. Even Gerard had never encountered such a creature. The vet warned them that this monster killed purely for the sake of killing. Previously, Erica wrecked Stiles' car, so now he was at the senior's place for repairs, only to be overcharged. Grumbling, he accepted his fate. Upon entering the house, he found the doorknob covered in a sticky substance. Complaining, he walked inside, only to lose control of his hands. Looking out the window, he saw a creature with claws perched on the senior's roof. It was a Kanima, a form of shapeshifter. The Kanima first paralyzed the senior by scratching his neck, then sabotaged the lift, leaving Stiles helpless as he watched the senior get crushed. However, Stiles managed to call the police. Fortunately for him, the Kanima only had eyes for the senior. Elsewhere, Allison was about to sneak out to meet Scott when her grandfather showed up. Their relationship was distant, and Gerard wanted to bridge the gap. During their conversation, Gerard dropped his notebook, and Allison picked it up, with Gerard playing the family loyalty card, saying she could only fully trust her family. Allison assured him she was trustworthy. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the repair shop. Stiles claimed he was just passing by. The sheriff was worried about his son. Every time there was a murder, Stiles was nearby, making him a magnet for trouble. By the time Allison reached the forest, Scott had already left. She huffed at men's impatience. In reality, Scott had gone to pick up his best friend. Stiles, feeling down, confided that those people felt like friends wearing Halloween masks. He didn't know them, but he felt they knew him. Meanwhile, Derek and his 3 betas were hiding out in an abandoned train station to avoid the Hunters. Derek subjected them to hellish training. Isaac, who played both mother and father roles to his younger siblings, attacked with flashy but ineffective moves, easily countered by Derek. Erica's attempts at sneak attacks were full of flaws, disappointing Derek. Despite Erica's attempts at seduction, Derek remained unamused. Isaac complained, asking for a break, feeling like he had broken 100 bones. Feigning concern, Derek approached, offering to rub it better only to break another bone. Derek clarified he wasn't teaching them to fight, but to survive, emphasizing that their threats included not only the Hunters, but also the brutal Kanima. Early in the morning, Lydia's mother discovered blood all over her daughter's bed, and Lydia's hands were a mess of raw flesh. The shattered mirror explained everything, but Lydia couldn't remember a thing. Her mental state was worsening. Her mother decided it was time for a visit to the school counselor. While waiting, a handsome young man struck up a conversation with Lydia, curious about her condition. His prying was invasive and rude. Lydia, annoyed, retorted that she had a phobia of people asking about her private life. The young man smirked and said he had a phobia of cute yet narcissistic girls. Lydia was momentarily stunned. Wasn't he describing her? This guy had a sharp tongue. Their brief encounter ended when the counselor called Lydia in. Meanwhile, Scott told Stiles about the monster manual. If they could get their hands on it, they could use the creature's traits to uncover its true identity. Stiles approached Allison for help. She wondered why Scott didn't come himself. With her grandfather now the principal, they couldn't be seen together often. After hearing Stiles' explanation, Allison thought of her grandfather's notebook. Poor Stiles became their messenger, running back and forth, completely out of breath. Lydia even questioned the counselor's abilities. The counselor asked probing questions that made Lydia reflect deeply. Meanwhile, Jackson approached Dany, handing him a memory card with a video he recorded during the full moon. He insisted Dany keep it confidential, no matter what he saw. The girly Dany, misunderstanding, joked that he's not letting him into his bed since Jackson is not his type. Allison guessed that the notebook was in her grandfather's office. After school, she invited him to a game, seizing the chance to steal his keys. Before the game, Dany found Jackson and mentioned an issue with the video. The recording was missing 2 hours. Jackson pondered, realizing the missing footage might show him transforming into a werewolf, but he didn't know who had edited the video. The opposing team had a giant player, putting Beacon Hills High at a disadvantage. Because of Gerard's presence, Scott couldn't use his werewolf strength. In the stands, Allison pretended to be cold to borrow her grandfather's coat, then secretly passed the keys to Stiles. On his way to the principal's office, Stiles found Lydia crying. Torn between his mission and comforting his crush, Stiles approached her. Lydia, not wanting to show her vulnerability, raised her car window. Stiles melted her heart with one line, saying she looked really beautiful when she cried. Lydia lowered the window with a mix of tears and laughter. On the field, the players were severely injured, yet the coach still forced them to play. Even so, they were short-handed, as the opposing team's giant player was unstoppable. With their players dropping like flies, the coach suddenly remembered Stiles, their eternal benchwarmer, who now missed his chance to debut. In desperation, the coach scanned the stands and spotted Boyd, who was eager to join, but Erica quickly reminded him to stay low-key as per their boss's orders. However, no man can resist the chance to shine. Lydia was pouring out the strange occurrences in her life, on the verge of a breakdown. Hearing the cheers from the field, Stiles suddenly remembered his mission. Lydia had just stopped crying when Stiles awkwardly asked her to keep crying as he needed a few minutes. Lydia rolled her eyes, feeling aggrieved. Her crocodile tears started flowing again. Meanwhile, Stiles searched the principal's office but couldn't find the manual. Unexpectedly, Erica showed up, following his body smell. On the field, Boyd used his werewolf strength to tackle the giant, boosting the team's morale. Scott was both shocked and angry. Boyd had revealed his powers right under Gerard's nose. Elsewhere, Stiles was dragged to the swimming pool. Derek demanded details about the incident at the repair shop. With the police and hunters indifferent, Derek took it upon himself to rid the town of threats. Stiles lied without flinching. Old habits die hard. But Derek's intimidation was as effective as ever, forcing Stiles to think carefully about his next words. Boyd, unstoppable, helped his team equalize. Scott warned him against abusing his powers, but Boyd ignored him. Scott had no choice but to use his own strength to cover for Boyd, only to be tackled by the giant, breaking his leg. Everyone rushed to his aid, but Scott stood up as if nothing had happened, fooling everyone except Gerard, who grew suspicious of Scott's true identity. Allison quickly stepped in to help cover for Scott. Stiles half-heartedly described the Kanima's traits, noticing Derek's serious expression. Following their gaze, Stiles saw the Kanima above them. Just then, Erica was knocked unconscious, and Derek's first concern was Stiles' safety. Distracted, Derek was slashed by the Kanima's tail, paralyzing him instantly. Stiles helped Derek escape, with the Kanima leisurely pursuing them, waiting for its prey to tire. Exhausted, Stiles tried to call for help, accidentally causing Derek to fall into the pool, dropping his phone. Torn between saving Derek and calling for help, Stiles jumped into the water. They discovered the Kanima's weakness. It was afraid of water, pacing on the edge of the pool. Meanwhile, Scott was invited to dinner at Gerard's house. For Scott, it felt like walking into the lion's den. Chris was worried, and Allison's mother looked at Scott with pure hatred. The dinner was painfully awkward, with everyone lost in their own thoughts. Gerard broke the silence first, surprisingly speaking in Scott's favor and supporting his relationship with Allison. Chris, not wanting to expose Scott's identity, warned him about the consequences if Gerard found out the truth. After dinner, Allison took Scott to her grandfather's room under the pretense of having a private chat. Using his enhanced werewolf hearing, Scott easily cracked the safe and found an old book. Their excitement turned to disappointment when they realized it was just a recipe book. Gerard seemed to have everything under control. Back in the water, Stiles and Derek couldn't stay submerged indefinitely. Stiles decided to risk it and retrieve his phone from the shore, leaving Derek to sink. He managed to get the phone, but just as he called Scott, Scott hung up on him since he was busy snooping around. If Stiles called again, Derek might drown, so he threw the phone away and dove back to save Derek. Stiles felt miserable. He had the phone but nowhere to put it. Scott and Allison were discouraged, unable to find the monster manual. Suddenly, Allison had a flash of insight. Maybe it wasn't a book at all. She remembered the USB drive on the key. Using the excuse of picking up his mom, Scott left. Gerard smiled warmly and complimented Scott. Scott first went to the school, grabbed Gerard's USB drive, and then heard Stiles and Derek's cries for help. He pulled them out of the pool just as the Kanima attacked. Scott was no match for it and was thrown aside by its tail. In desperation, he grabbed a glass shard. The Kanima, seeing its reflection in the shard, curiously examined itself before fleeing in panic. The trio was baffled, thinking that the Kanima was scared of its own ugly face. Scott copied the contents of the USB drive. The text was unlike anything they had seen or heard before. Derek explained that the Kanima was a malformed evolutionary offshoot. Derek knew little more, but the Kanima's terrifying strength was undeniable. Scott suggested teaming up with the hunters, but Derek angrily dismissed the idea, insisting on handling it himself. They parted ways, each determined to find their own solution. Later, Scott went to the hospital to pick up his mom. He was ambushed by Gerard, who stabbed him in the side without warning. Gerard twisted the knife, causing excruciating pain, but didn't finish Scott off. Instead, he proposed a deal, threatening Scott's mother to ensure his cooperation. The scene shifts to Jackson working out obsessively to unlock his potential. He dreams of becoming a werewolf, but reality is harsh. The muscular Jackson couldn't lift the barbell that the she-wolf Erica easily picked up with one hand. Jackson was then taken to Derek's lair. Derek suspected that Jackson, who had failed to transform, might be the Kanima. He questioned Jackson about what happened to him on the night of the full moon. Frustrated, Jackson insisted nothing happened, and even had footage to prove it, prompting laughter from the group. Derek pulled out a glass shard, claiming he had a more effective way to verify Jackson's identity. Jackson panicked, thinking he was about to be killed. Instead, Derek used the Kanima's venom to test Jackson. When Jackson became paralyzed, it proved he couldn't resist the Kanima's toxin, disappointing Derek. Isaac now looked down on Jackson, who had previously bullied him, and threatened him to do a task. The next day, Jackson went to the police station and retracted his earlier testimony, clearing Isaac of patricide. This allowed Isaac to return to school. Jackson was left to stew in his frustration. The girly Dany told him he had found a way to recover the lost footage. Although Jackson wasn't sure if he was a werewolf, his enhanced senses allowed him to overhear Isaac and Erica's conversation. He learned that Derek's next target was Lydia, his ex-girlfriend. In class, Jackson shared this with Scott and Stiles, also learning about the Kanima, a terrifying shapeshifter. Stiles couldn't believe it, thinking that Lydia couldn't possibly be the monstrous Kanima. Meanwhile, Lydia diligently took notes. In her vision, the students answering questions turned into Peter, and their answers spiraled into a symbol of revenge. All her classmates stared blankly at her, making Lydia realize she was hallucinating again, though the vividness terrified her. Suddenly, the classroom was empty except for her and Peter. He approached, overturning desks, and blew a breath at her. In reality, Lydia had been writing indecipherable words on the blackboard. A boy who had previously teased Lydia was there, and Stiles realized Lydia indeed had issues. The text she had written when inverted read, "Someone help me." Even Stiles began to doubt Lydia now. Fearing Derek might harm Lydia, Stiles and Scott guarded her during chemistry class. Isaac and Erica waited for an opportunity, but the chemistry teacher insisted on rotating lab partners. Both sides vied to pair with Lydia. Eventually, Isaac paired with her. The lesson involved making edible crystals, and Isaac used crystals laced with Kanima venom to test Lydia. Scott realized too late. Lydia ate the crystals but showed no reaction, indicating immunity. She had passed Derek's test. Their vigilant protection could only keep Lydia safe for so long. Derek would act after school. They decided to split up. Scott would negotiate with Derek. Allison would seek a friend who could translate the monster manual, and Stiles would stick to Lydia like glue. During her therapy session, Lydia repeatedly associated patterns with Peter, but remained dismissive and uncooperative with the treatment. The therapist showed Lydia a drawing of a wolf, asking what it was. Lydia said it was a butterfly. Jackson, Dany, and Matt huddled together in the library, trying to figure out how to recover the video footage. Matt suggested that on the night of the full moon, someone had tampered with the video in Jackson's bedroom. This gave Jackson a revelation that besides his parents, who else could easily access his room? Just then, Lydia finished her session with the school counselor, sticking closely with Stiles. Jackson instantly knew the answer. His ex-girlfriend Lydia had a key to his room. Allison's friend, who turned out to be the school counselor, had managed to translate parts of the monster manual, which was in Latin. She deciphered that the Kanima, like wolves, gained significant power during the full moon. The counselor teased, saying it sounded a lot like werewolves. She also noted that shapeshifters are social creatures. While wolves seek a pack, shapeshifters seek a companion, suggesting the Kanima's instinct to find a partner. Unfortunately, these clues didn't help clear Lydia's name. Meanwhile, Scott confronted Derek, who was convinced that Lydia was the Kanima. Scott didn't deny this, but also couldn't let Lydia be killed. Derek exchanged a mischievous glance with Boyd and said he was not going to kill her. Scott realized that Isaac and Erica were tasked with eliminating Lydia. He tried to rush back to the classroom but was knocked down by Boyd. Derek began explaining that both werewolves and Kanima are types of shapeshifters, and that the nature of the transformation can reflect one's true nature. Even Stiles had called Lydia cold-blooded, which meant she must be the Kanima. Scott tried to defend Lydia, suggesting she might be immune since she could resist werewolf venom, so maybe she could resist Kanima venom too. But Derek was adamant that no one could be immune. Jackson was an example Derek couldn't explain, but he refused to accept the concept of immunity. Both Jackson and Lydia had undergone changes, but while Jackson passed the test, Lydia did not. Therefore, Lydia must be the Kanima. In the library, the video was 60% recovered. While looking through snapshots of a game, Matt noticed that every photo of Scott was overexposed, obscuring his face. At that moment, Isaac and Erica arrived, only to find Lydia missing. Lydia had been spirited away by Scott and his friends under the pretense of studying, and Jackson, showing some decency, joined in. They took Lydia to Scott's house, where Stiles' excessive security measures puzzled her. Stiles made a poor excuse about a recent spate of burglaries and murders in the neighborhood, which only made the situation more awkward. Jackson asked to speak with Lydia alone, so they went upstairs. Back in the classroom, Matt stopped Scott and snapped a picture of him. Preoccupied with Lydia's safety, Scott didn't pay much attention. Matt, checking his camera, noticed that Scott's face was still overexposed. Meanwhile, Lydia thought Jackson had a change of heart. But to her dismay, he only wanted his key back. This infuriated Lydia. She had been through so much, bitten by a madman, roaming naked, enduring countless misfortunes, yet Jackson only cared about his key. It was heartless. Unfazed, Jackson used his heightened senses to monitor Lydia's heartbeat, accusing her of lying. Scott arrived at the library only to find Lydia missing. The group turned to Dany for information. At that moment, Allison called Scott, urging him to come home quickly. The sky was darkening, and 4 figures stood across the street. Dany was bewildered, wondering why everyone was looking for Lydia. He hadn't noticed that the missing footage had been restored. The video showed Jackson, who had been sleeping, suddenly sitting up with glowing eyes. It turned out that Jackson was the real Kanima. 4 werewolves surrounded him but didn't attack. Stiles and Allison were deeply worried. Even if a fight broke out, Scott didn't seem to be a match for him. Allison was ready to call her father for help, but that was a last resort. Jackson, now aggressive, demanded to know where Lydia's key was. Lydia, on the verge of tears, chose to remain silent, which Jackson took as a sign of guilt. He accused her of seeing what happened to him, taking the tape from the camera and cutting out the most crucial part. The boy was obsessed with becoming a werewolf, to the point of madness. Derek had mentioned that shapeshifters could vary based on their nature, reflecting their true selves. Jackson's stubbornness and cold-heartedness made sense. No wonder he turned into a cold-blooded creature. Tired of his accusations, Lydia decided to return the key, revealing it had always been hanging around her neck like a precious keepsake. Jackson was moved. Once again, he had hurt the girl who truly loved him. He tried to make amends with a kiss, and if that wasn't enough, a deep tongue massage. Despite her words, Lydia was still in love. Once in love, even if hurt multiple times, she was like a moth to a flame. She melted into the kiss, not noticing Jackson's body starting to transform. Stiles and Allison noticed there were now only 3 werewolves outside. Isaac had vanished. They felt something was wrong. Suddenly, Isaac appeared silently behind them. The sounds of a fight downstairs interrupted Jackson and Lydia. As Lydia stepped out, Jackson's body began to undergo a dramatic change. Feeling something was about to burst from him, Lydia was near her breaking point. She was smart enough to know her friends were hiding something from her. She knew there was danger, but had no clue where it stemmed from. When she returned to the room, Jackson was gone. Lydia hid in the closet and called the police. Allison arrived upstairs to find both of them missing. The venom on the windowsill indicated one of them was the Kanima. With no news from Isaac, Derek sent in Erica. She confronted Allison upstairs. Allison shot an arrow, which Erica effortlessly caught, laughing, thinking she had won. But the arrow was tipped with Kanima venom, and Erica fell. Scott returned and easily dealt with Isaac and Erica, throwing them out. Derek was both frustrated and angry. It seemed he would have to handle things himself. Scott stepped out first, with Stiles and Allison right behind him. At that moment, Derek realized why Scott had always rejected him. Scott wasn't an Omega Wolf. He was an alpha with his own pack. Though Stiles and Allison weren't werewolves, they were like a pack, and Scott was their alpha. Suddenly, a hissing sound came from above. The 5 looked up to see the Kanima prowling on the roof, roaring in defiance before disappearing into the night. Someone else would be killed tonight. Lydia stormed out, demanding to know what was going on. Scott figured out that the Kanima was Jackson. Meanwhile, a car was parked on a rural road, its bumper sticker quoting Einstein's words. The Kanima crawled to the driver's seat, carefully placing its palm on the window. Inside, a person mirrored the gesture as if responding to a pet. The Kanima curiously examined its reflection before fleeing in fright. The mysterious driver quickly drove away. The bloodthirsty Kanima was revealed to be Jackson, but he had no awareness of his monstrous identity, acting like a nightmarish sleepwalker. Dany had restored the video of Jackson transforming, though he hadn't watched it. Still, he became the Kanima's next target. Derek was the first to catch up to the Kanima. Despite being an alpha werewolf, he was steadily pushed back by the Kanima's relentless attacks. The duel between the 2 shapeshifters had not yet reached a decisive outcome when Hunter Chris joined the fray. The unexpected interference from the Hunter caused Derek to be defeated by the Kanima and forced to retreat. Chris was a sharpshooter, hitting the Kanima with several bullets, causing it to collapse. However, the Kanima possessed the same healing abilities as werewolves and quickly got back on its feet. The Kanima's evolution was more extreme than that of a werewolf, trading reason and awareness for pure power, making it the ultimate killing machine. Chris was no match for it either. At this moment, Gerard arrived. Standing less than a meter from the Kanima, it curiously regarded the old man without any intention of attacking. Just then, Scott finally arrived at the scene. The Kanima, seemingly receiving a command, chose to retreat. Gerard's expression was inscrutable and he remained motionless. Scott wondered what the Kanima was plotting. He couldn't let Jackson run amok. Scott followed Jackson to a peculiar party attended by the LGBTQ+ community. Stiles tagged along. In the crowd, they spotted the girly Dany. Because Dany had helped Jackson restore the transformation footage, the Kanima instinctively wanted to eliminate this witness. Little did it know, Dany hadn't even watched the video. The 2 planned to enter through the back door, only to find it locked. As Stiles suggested climbing through a window, Scott simply broke the lock with a yank. The club was stunned. Scott, a lone wolf amidst a sea of muscles, was a sight to behold. What were these 3 women doing here? No wonder no one paid them any mind. Using his keen senses, Scott found Dany in the crowd. Dany, heartbroken, had come to find a new love. For their first time in such a place, the 2 boys unexpectedly found themselves popular. Some hunky men even offered them drinks, but they decided to keep their distance. Scott soon noticed the Kanima crawling on the rooftop. If Jackson were conscious, he would never harm his best buddy. But now, he was a complete beast. In the cover of the fog, the Kanima mingled with the crowd, heading straight for Dany, mowing down anyone in its path. Dany was paralyzed, helpless against its assault. Scott was desperate. The Kanima was carving a path of destruction, but Scott couldn't keep up. Suddenly, a pair of blood-red eyes appeared in the mist. Derek had arrived. Just as the Kanima was about to strike Dany, Derek slashed its throat. Everything happened in a flash. Panic ensued, and people scattered. Both Derek and the Kanima vanished. Scott followed the blood trail to find a severely injured Jackson, his fatal wound slowly healing. Meanwhile, Lydia was escorted home by Allison, who tried to comfort her. While walking her dog in the backyard, the boy who had previously harassed her suddenly appeared. Lydia was wary of this midnight intrusion. The boy, smiling, explained he lived across the street and had come over because of the dog's barking. He then confessed his feelings to Lydia, but Lydia rolled her eyes. Unperturbed, the boy picked a flower from her yard, offering it to her. Little did he realize it was from Lydia's own garden. Jackson was handed over to Stiles while Scott went to find Dany to figure out why the Kanima attacked him. Clearly, Dany had no idea. The police soon arrived at the scene, with the culprit Jackson lying in Stiles' car. When questioned by his sheriff dad, Stiles lied, saying he was just there to cheer up a heartbroken Dany. The sheriff was touched, calling Stiles a good friend. Though praised by his father, Stiles felt a pang of guilt, his eyes welling up because he had deceived him so many times. They secretly transported Jackson away, the hunter father and son also present at the scene. Chris confronted his father, asking why he wasn't attacked during his standoff with the Kanima. Gerard suggested that the creature followed specific rules. It seemed he knew more about the Kanima than he let on. Chris wanted to take out the Kanima, but his father refused. Instead, he suggested turning the Kanima into their weapon against the werewolves, and that the best way to eliminate fear is to have someone else face it for yourselves. Jackson woke up to find himself locked in a police car meant for prisoners. Unaware of his actions, Jackson didn't appreciate the two boys' help. To him, this was a kidnapping. Stiles explained Jackson's transformation into the Kanima, but Jackson refused to believe his bullshit and even threatened to have his parents report it. Stiles, anticipating this, had sent a text from Jackson's phone to his father confessing his love. But Jackson's father, receiving the message, went to the sheriff, noting that Jackson had never said his love before. No wonder Jackson became the Kanima. He was practically cold-blooded. Allison discovered numerous surveillance cameras installed at school, and to her surprise, her mother had become a teacher there. The school was entirely under the hunter's control. Stiles listed Jackson's crimes, including nearly killing Dany the night before. Jackson remained defiant, insisting Dany was his best friend. But Stiles brought up a crucial question that shook Jackson. What happened to him on the night of the full moon? The answer was in the video Dany had restored. Scott visited Dany in the hospital, casually bringing up Jackson. Dany admitted to restoring the video but refused to reveal its contents. This only confirmed Scott's suspicions that the video held crucial information. He hurried to find it, only to discover it had already been taken. The three regrouped to discuss the situation. Someone had stolen the video to protect Jackson's secret. Recalling the monster manual, they realized the Kanima was seeking a master and had likely found one. Unbeknownst to them, Jackson heard everything from the police car, his senses as sharp as a werewolf's. They debated what to do with Jackson, knowing they couldn't keep him locked up forever. Stiles suggested eliminating him, calling Jackson a pure killer unworthy of saving. Allison's silence indicated her agreement. Only Scott refused to give up on Jackson, insisting the Kanima's actions weren't Jackson's will. He didn't know what he was doing. To persuade them, Scott compared it to his own near loss of control when he almost killed Allison and Jackson after turning dark. Someone had saved him then. Cold-hearted Jackson shed a tear, moved that Scott was still willing to stand up for him. Jackson's body began to change, his hands covered in scales. He first felt terror, then determination, forcing his beastly instincts back. He realized he truly was a monster. By evening, the police car was silent. Scott and Allison relaxed, listening to music and imagining their future. Lost in the moment, they were unaware that Jackson was desperately fighting the call, his skin slowly covered in scales. Stiles woke the sleeping pair, and the three discovered Jackson had escaped. Scott was filled with guilt for losing control at the crucial moment. Stiles suggested coming clean to his dad about the shapeshifter situation to gain police support. But how could they make his dad believe? Scott made up his mind. He was ready to reveal his true identity. Later, Allison returned home to find Lydia waiting for her. Lydia was ready to confide about her hallucinations, trusting only her best friend Allison and not the counselor. However, Allison was exhausted from the ordeal with Jackson and mentioned she needed someone to translate ancient Latin. To her surprise, Lydia knew how. Meanwhile, Scott and Stiles went to the police station to come clean to the sheriff about the shapeshifter situation. Unexpectedly, Jackson was there, accusing them of illegal detention, turning the tables on them. Their plan was thrown into chaos. Lydia corrected the counselor's translation mistake. It turns out the Kanima wasn't looking for a friend but a master. The Kanima struck again, killing a young couple. The mastermind behind these attacks was about to be revealed. Before he died, Peter, the former Alpha, had left a final trick. Lydia was the key to his resurrection. That night, the small town was rife with tension. Stiles and his sheriff father analyzed the victims and realized that the mechanic and the young couple killed by the Kanima were all graduates from the same year and students of chemistry teacher. They identified a pattern: graduates of the same year and the teacher's students. Using this, they compiled a list of potential targets for the Kanima. Jackson, like a puppet on strings, arrived at the ticket booth. Matt noticed his overly eager demeanor, but Jackson ignored him and cut to the front of the line. Scott watched him closely from the shadows. Jackson's predatory gaze made the girl with the nose ring uncomfortable, as if she were being examined by a hunter. During the transaction, Jackson touched her fingers, sending a shiver down her spine and ending the sale abruptly. Jackson's creepy stare lingered, making him seem like a total creep. On the other side, Chris took Allison to the morgue. Standing before two cold corpses, he lectured his daughter about the Kanima and its master's killing spree. He chastised her for hiding clues and shirking her hunter duties. Allison's defenses crumbled, and she revealed that Jackson was the Kanima, and the mastermind was someone they knew. To capture the Kanima, Derek, Isaac, and Scott visited the mysterious vet, who was definitely an ally. Despite the Kanima's paralyzing venom, there was no antidote. The creature's one weakness was its fear of water, but Jackson was a proficient swimmer, which didn't add up. The vet listened to their descriptions and formed a theory. If Jackson was the puppet master controlled him. The Kanima's fear of water stemmed not from Jackson, but from the master. The vet guessed the connection was mutual, influencing both ways. So if they trapped the Kanima, the master couldn't escape either. Tomorrow night's party would be the perfect opportunity. The next morning, Scott and Stiles learned from Matt that the underground party tickets were sold out. Matt's smugness irritated Stiles, who couldn't stand him for some reason. When they found out Dany had secured 2 tickets, they immediately sought him out, pestering him for the tickets. Isaac, witnessing this, couldn't stand it. He effortlessly snagged 2 tickets from other students, teaching Scott a lesson in embracing his inner wolf occasionally. Later, Scott and Allison had a secret meeting in the lab. Feeling guilty, Allison confessed she had told her father everything. Before she could finish, Scott interrupted her with a reassuring kiss. Unbeknownst to them, Allison's mother was spying from the doorway. Her body trembled with rage, and her hatred for Scott reached its peak. Meanwhile, the vet prepared 2 crucial items: an ultra-strong ketamine tranquilizer and mountain ash. The mountain ash would be used to create a barrier that neither werewolves nor the Kanima could cross. At tonight's underground party, Scott was in charge of injecting Jackson with the tranquilizer, while Stiles set up the barrier outside. On the other side, the hunters were also gearing up for action. Chris planned to locate Jackson through his daughter, then the hunters would storm in with overwhelming firepower. In the evening, Stiles bumped into his dad, who was just getting off work. He noticed his father wasn't carrying his gun and seemed to be avoiding him. After pressing for answers, Stiles learned that his misuse of police resources had led to his father's temporary suspension as sheriff. Instead of being angry, his father reassured him, making Stiles feel even guiltier. As the underground party kicked off, Scott and Stiles met up, ready to execute their plan. Scott was shocked to see Allison there, as she had accepted an invitation from Matt. Scott's anger wasn't because Allison was with another guy, but because of the danger tonight. Their lack of communication meant that both the werewolves and hunters were converging at the same location, setting the stage for a deadly confrontation. Frustrated and sensing imminent disaster, Scott harshly told Allison not to cause more trouble and walked away. Stiles circled the factory, spreading the mountain ash. Despite some mishaps with the quantity, he managed to complete the barrier without major issues. Worried about the impending clash between the werewolves and hunters, Scott handed the task of injecting Jackson to Isaac, urging him to be careful. Scott's genuine concern and charisma had earned Isaac's loyalty, even though Scott wasn't as strong as Derek. Both the werewolves and hunters arrived at the party simultaneously. Seeing each other, their long-standing enmity flared up, and they forgot their primary mission, to deal with the Kanima. Meanwhile, Jackson approached the girl with the nose ring, but Erica intercepted him with seductive charm, giving Isaac a chance to pull out the tranquilizer. Unexpectedly, Jackson struck first, injuring them with his venomous claws. However, Isaac managed to inject Jackson with the tranquilizer before succumbing to paralysis, fulfilling Scott's expectations. The fight between the werewolves and hunters intensified. After a brief suppression by the hunters' firepower, Derek and Boyd began to dominate with their superhuman strength. Simultaneously, Scott was rushing to the battlefield to stop the conflict, but he was hit by a car driven by none other than Allison's mother. When Scott regained consciousness, he found himself weak and powerless. Allison's mother smirked, revealing she had used wolfsbane. She had researched Scott's medical records and knew about his asthma history, planning to fake his death by asthma attack. Her cruelty was shocking. Even though Jackson was unconscious, his instinctual self-defense made it impossible for Isaac to get close. The three of them were at a loss, hoping the person controlling Jackson would appear. Jackson, as if hearing them, suddenly opened his eyes, saying he was right beside them. Jackson's consciousness faded as the master took control of his body from a distance. Meanwhile, at the party, Matt and Allison stumbled upon their chemistry teacher. Nervously, he tried to justify his behavior, saying the girl he was with was already 21, before quickly leading her away. After the fierce battle, Chris's team had taken heavy losses, and Derek's pack was also incapacitated. The werewolves and hunters reached a stalemate, both sides silently agreeing to a ceasefire. Finally, the mastermind spoke up. Stiles demanded to know why he killed innocent people. Speaking through Jackson, the controller said those people were murderers who deserved to die. Stiles asked whom they had killed, to which controller responded that they killed him. The chilling answer suggested a vengeful spirit. Jackson transformed into the Kanima, thrashing his head like a rattle. The three of them quickly retreated, blocking the door. However, the Kanima smashed through the wall, ignoring them completely. The girl with the nose ring went backstage to rest, providing the Kanima with an opportunity. In an instant, its venomous claws slashed her chicken throat, but spared her running nose. Meanwhile, Allison's mother stood over Scott, beginning her victory speech. She mocked Scott, saying an Omega Wolf was not allowed to touch her daughter. But Scott wasn't alone. He had temporarily joined Derek's pack. Using his last bit of strength, Scott howled for help. Derek heard the call but was blocked by the barrier. Desperate, Derek shouted for Stiles to open the barrier. Following the howl, Derek found Scott, but the room was filled with wolfsbane smoke, weakening him. Instead of retreating, Allison's mother pressed the attack. During the fight, Derek managed to bite her, forcing her to flee in panic. Derek didn't pursue. He urgently took Scott away. The gruesome death of the girl with the nose ring was finally noticed, ending the party prematurely. The police arrived, including Stiles' sheriff dad, who realized the girl wasn't on his list of victim targets, indicating his pattern was flawed. However, he didn't notice that although the girl wasn't a student of the chemistry teacher, she was a graduate of that year. As Allison left the party, she ran into her grandfather, Gerard. He hadn't been involved in the night's fight, leaving her to wonder what he had been up to. Despite the hunter's failed plan, Gerard was smiling. Derek brought Scott to the vet clinic. Both the werewolves and hunters had failed in their missions. The mysterious vet and the counselor sat together, making the situation even more enigmatic. Their true identities remained a mystery, and it seemed the petty skirmishes were beneath their notice. Their ambitions were clearly much larger. Elsewhere, Chris finally reunited with his wife, only to discover she was about to become a werewolf. Lydia woke up in terror, realizing it had all been a nightmare. She cried, seeing Peter lying half-naked on her bed. Lydia told Peter to stay away from her sexy body, but the truth was, he was in her mind, creating hallucinations to torment her into complying with his resurrection plan. The next full moon was imminent, the last one of the winter, known as the worm moon, because it heralded the arrival of spring and the return of life, including insects. Coincidentally, the worm moon was also Lydia's birthday. Peter planned a significant event for her. Despite the illusions, Lydia was forced to succumb. Desperate, Lydia asked Peter why he had chosen her. Peter smiled and said it was because of her unique immunity. Lydia didn't understand what she was immune to, and Peter began sowing doubt, saying they never told her the truth and she had always been kept in the dark. Lydia felt both hurt and angry because she knew Peter was right. Peter decided to show her the truth himself. In the next moment, he vanished, and Lydia felt a chilling presence. Looking out the window, she saw a red-eyed creature, both strange and familiar. After his wife was bitten by a werewolf, Chris hurriedly tried to clean her wound, but she knew it was futile. With the full moon approaching, she would inevitably transform into a werewolf. Gerard had already written her off this family. To him, she was as good as dead. He sternly reminded Chris that they were hunters with a mission to uphold, and now his wife was just a monster waiting to emerge. Back at the werewolf den, Scott sought Derek's help again to figure out a way to deal with the Kanima. However, Derek was feeling despondent, regretting ever having bitten Jackson. He was too preoccupied with the upcoming full moon, sensing it would be particularly troublesome this time. Meanwhile, Allison and Scott had a big argument, leaving their relationship strained. Matt saw this as an opportunity and made a move on Allison, but she wasn't easily swayed and politely declined his hormone advances. When dropping Matt off at home, Allison accidentally discovered photos he had secretly taken of her. She was horrified to realize he was a creep. When Matt returned to fetch his bag, he noticed that Allison had found out about his obsession. The atmosphere grew tense. Unashamedly, Matt invited her to step out and see his work. Wary of him, Allison was now even more distant. To help his 3 young werewolves manage the full moon, Derek brought out some old family heirlooms. The box bore a triskele, symbolizing alpha, beta, and omega wolves in their world. These roles could shift, just as Scott's had. Derek's favoritism towards Scott caused resentment among his pack. The iron chains in the box were meant to restrain them during the full moon, as they hadn't yet reached Scott's level of control. Derek gave special attention to Erica, selecting a crown of thorns for her, which looked painful just to wear. It was Lydia's birthday, and she first informed Allison. While the 2 girls were picking out outfits, Allison's mother showed up, unusually tender, wanting to see her daughter one last time. Allison, however, was uninterested and unresponsive. Her mother walked away, looking back frequently, perhaps regretting her harshness that led to this estrangement. Stiles was reviewing graduation records when his father informed him that the chemistry teacher had been detained. Tire tracks from 2 crime scenes matched his car. Although it seemed the case was solved, Stiles had a nagging feeling something was amiss. He continued digging through the files and discovered that Isaac's father, a former swim coach, had connections to all the murder victims who were his former team members. Stiles had found the real clue. Elsewhere, Lydia invited Jackson to her birthday party. Looking stern and under dual influence, Jackson seemed to awaken when Lydia touched him. He was a puppet, half awake, controlled by 2 minds. Aware of his condition, Jackson warned Lydia she should not want him there. Despite being frightened, Lydia insisted that Jackson attend. Both were under someone else's control, powerless to resist. In the evening, Stiles was the first to arrive, carrying a gift bigger than anyone else's. Lydia found it quite embarrassing and walked away. Soon after, Scott and Allison showed up, the atmosphere between them a bit tense. Stiles shared the clue he had discovered that the victims were all somehow associated with the school swim team and had a fear of water, suggesting a connection. Lydia's birthday parties were usually very popular, but this year she had become the town's oddball and no one showed up. Seeing Lydia had prepared so much food and drink, Allison felt a pang of guilt, admitting she'd been neglecting Lydia over the past 2 weeks. Scott remarked that Lydia had ignored Stiles for 10 years. Stiles said it was just because he never caught Lydia's eye. What a devoted friend he was. He claimed to know some party experts who could liven things up. Soon enough, the doorbell rang, and Lydia opened the door to find a bizarre assortment of guests. Back at the werewolf den, Derek had tied up his 3 young werewolves. If they lost control and started fighting each other, even Derek, as the alpha, would struggle to manage the situation. Erica was in agony, wearing the crown of thorns, her screams echoing. Derek was indeed ruthless. At the party, Scott and Allison spotted Jackson. He actually showed up, though it clearly wasn't by his own choice. Lydia was a bit thrilled and handed him a drink as soon as they met. Jackson's expression remained stern, while Lydia's eyes gleamed with a sly look. The drink was spiked with wolfsbane. Meanwhile, Chris prepared a variety of medicines, desperately trying anything, but his wife had already given up on treatment. She went upstairs to write her will. Gerard advised his son to help his wife have a dignified death. Scott kept a close eye on Jackson, ignoring Allison in the process. Lydia handed him a drink and asked about his situation with Allison. Scott didn't want to drink, but under Lydia's persuasion, he took a sip. Matt also attended the party and sought out Allison to apologize for the photos, but Allison had already lost all interest in him. Any explanation was futile. Matt lost his patience, angrily saying she was too self-absorbed, and asked her if she really thought his room was full of her pictures, suggesting he's really a creep. Allison tried to leave, but Matt grabbed her sexy body. She easily threw him off, and as she looked around the party, she noticed a hunter with a familiar-looking crossbow. She wanted to warn Scott, but was shot in the stomach with an arrow. Only then did she realize the hunter was herself. Allison woke up from the hallucination, the wolfsbane starting to take effect. Elsewhere, Stiles also started experiencing hallucinations. He saw his drunken father crash into the party, publicly shaming and berating him. Allison felt scared by her own vulnerability, while Stiles was racked with guilt over his father. The hallucinations revealed each person's deepest fears. Scott's vision was outrageous. He saw the Kanima and Allison together in a compromising yoga position, which was utterly obscene. He nearly lost control of his animal instincts. Jackson saw the backs of his biological parents, their faces blank and featureless. Behind him, everyone was staring intently. Jackson's face contorted in fear and confusion. He couldn't bear to look. Then his own face disappeared. His parents were faceless because Jackson had forgotten what they looked like. He was faceless because he feared being forgotten by others. While everyone was trapped in their hallucinations, Lydia calmly left the party. As the worm moon rose, howls echoed through the werewolf den. The three beta wolves lost their minds, and despite being chained, Derek remained on high alert. Erica and Boyd were the first to lose control, and Derek found himself under attack from both sides. Just as he was struggling to handle them, Isaac broke free. Derek had his hands full, getting pummeled by the younger wolves, bringing shame to his alpha status. At a critical moment, Isaac, still chained, charged back in to help Derek subdue the others. Among the three betas, Isaac showed the most potential, much like Scott. At the party, Stiles was despondent due to his hallucinations, and Scott was at a loss, unable to wake him. A girl stepped forward to help, pressing Stiles into the water to snap him out of it. Moonlight streamed into the room, casting a serene glow. Upstairs, Chris's wife lay in his arms. As she was about to transform into a wolf, Chris plunged a dagger into her abdomen. The life and color drained from her eyes as they gazed at the last full moon of winter, a scene both tragic and romantic. After helping Derek subdue the others, Isaac obediently accepted being bound again. This young wolf showed promise of becoming a leader in his own right. The night passed without further incident. Derek stepped outside the den to catch his breath, only to be ambushed by Lydia, who knocked him out with a puff of purple powder. Allison received news that her mother had passed away. Crying, she blamed her father, who could only offer apologies. Back at the party, everyone who had drunk the spiked drinks was going wild, as if on a high. A few were thrown into the pool. As Scott and Stiles worried about how to handle the chaos, they heard Matt's cries for help. He had been thrown into the pool and was struggling, unable to swim. Scott and Stiles simultaneously realized that the water-fearing controller had to be Matt. Jackson was the first to jump in and save Matt, an uncharacteristic act of kindness. Given that Jackson was still under someone's control, it's clear that the controller was Matt. Scott and Stiles, now on high alert, didn't dare reveal Matt's identity, fearing he might lash out. They could only watch as he left. Someone called the police, and the party descended into chaos as sirens wailed. Scott rushed out and spotted Matt across the street, shivering but with eyes blazing with anger. The Kanima was crouched at his feet, protectively wrapping its GPS tail around Matt like a loyal dog. In the werewolf's old manner, Lydia began the ritual to resurrect Peter. She placed Derek's hand in Peter's, then adjusted the mirrors to reflect the moonlight. After several reflections, the moonlight finally shone on Peter's body. Miraculously, Peter was successfully revived. The scene shifts to Matt, who had a habit of spying on others. When Jackson borrowed his camera, Matt secretly tampered with it, spying on his classmate as he slept. He watched for half the night until he stumbled upon a shocking secret. Jackson, while asleep, rose as though sleepwalking, his eyes glowing gold. His body twisted and convulsed until he transformed into a lizard-like creature. Matt was terrified, but in the rearview mirror he saw the Kanima approaching him. However, the Kanima did not attack. Instead, it placed its claw on the car window. Matt nervously placed his hand over the claw, forming a kind of pact with the creature. From then on, whenever he harbored murderous intent towards someone, Jackson would transform into the Kanima and carry out the deed. It's revealed that Matt was actually the puppet master controlling Jackson. Therefore, Scott and Stiles wanted to investigate Matt's past to uncover his connection to the victims. Stiles' father was reluctant to help because he didn't know about the monster, so he was skeptical of the boy's claims. For instance, what was Matt's motive for killing the swim coach and team members? Stiles joked that because their swim team was terrible and hadn't won in 6 years. After much persistence, Stiles' dad took them to the police station to look through records. Although he had been temporarily suspended as sheriff, he still commanded respect at the station. The three of them reviewed hospital footage, and Stiles immediately recognized the back of Matt's head. On the night the pregnant woman was killed, Matt had indeed been at the hospital, but a mere silhouette wasn't enough evidence. Upon reviewing the footage again, they noticed Matt had spoken with Scott's mother. Scott contacted his mom, who confirmed that Matt had been at the hospital that night. They also discovered that on the night the mechanic was killed, a receipt bearing Matt's signature was found. Fingerprints matching Matt's were also discovered on the chemistry teacher's car. These seemingly insignificant clues pieced together became solid evidence. Just as they solved the case, Matt stormed the police station. With the Kanima as his enforcer, he was unstoppable. Meanwhile, at the Werewolf Manor, the vet woke up the unconscious Derek. Peter and Lydia were nowhere to be found. Derek was extremely weak, having had some of his power stolen by his revived Uncle Peter. The vet quickly reassured him, saying he was still an alpha wolf, but adding that he was just not a very strong one. Irritated, Derek asked what he was doing here. The vet replied that he was helping his family, and it was a promise he made to Derek's mother. The vet's mysterious identity suggested a deep connection with Derek's family. He warned Derek that while Peter was also weak, he was cunning and manipulative. The vet advised Derek to never trust his uncle. He then pointed out that Scott was always trustworthy but currently in trouble. Derek needed to find and help him. Elsewhere, Matt had gone off the deep end, ordering Jackson to kill all the on-duty officers at the station. Stiles' father was handcuffed in the holding cell. Meanwhile, Allison was in a deep depression following her mother's death, with her spirit broken. Gerard played the role of the loving grandfather, using the opportunity to draw her closer. His true aim was to use her for his plans, so mere comfort was not enough. Feigning accidental disclosure, Gerard claimed that her mother was killed by Derek. To prove his sincerity, he produced Allison's mother's suicide note, further fanning the flames of vengeance. Allison's eyes hardened, burning with the desire for revenge. She burned her mother's note, discarded all her hobbies, and transformed from a blooming young girl into a cold-hearted hunter. Inside the police station, Scott and Stiles were forced to destroy all evidence under Matt's threat. Just then, lights flashed outside the station. It was likely Scott's mother arriving. Scott pleaded with Matt to leave his mother out of this mess, promising she wouldn't testify. Matt just smirked and ordered Scott to personally bring her inside, declaring that none of them were leaving here alive today. Nervously, Scott opened the door, but instead of his mother, a tall figure loomed into view. Derek had arrived heroically, but in the next second, Derek collapsed to the ground. It turned out Jackson, in his lizard form, had struck from behind. What a disgrace. The boys had hoped Derek would save the day, only for him to be taken down immediately. The Kanima's abilities were overpowered. Matt was elated, knowing that with a mere thought, the Kanima would handle any problem for him. Werewolves and hunters were no match. He assumed Stiles could transform too, and was curious, but Stiles dismissed his bullshit. With just a look, Matt paralyzed Stiles, who fell awkwardly on top of Derek, much to Derek's annoyance. While both were paralyzed and exchanging banter, more lights flashed outside. This time, it was indeed Scott's mother. Matt pointed a gun at Scott's neck, leaving her in shock. Matt had promised not to harm her, but he'd made no such promise about Scott. He shot Scott in the abdomen and then locked Scott's mother in a holding cell. Matt's elaborate scheme wasn't just about destroying evidence. He was after the monster manual. The deeper his connection with the Kanima, the more his body changed, turning into a Kanima himself. The psychiatrist's translation had been correct. The Kanima was seeking a companion. Matt was using the Kanima for revenge, but in turn, the monster was assimilating Matt. The monster manual, however, was in Gerard's possession. Scott texted Allison asking for the manual, but the message had a hidden plea for help. Allison, blinded by hatred, misinterpreted Scott's intent. Rather than stopping the Kanima, she wanted Derek dead. Chris was powerless to sway her. He asked what would happen to Derek's pack after killing him. Allison coldly replied they would wipe them all out. Derek and Stiles were lying uncomfortably on the ground, fully aware that the manual wouldn't help Matt. Killing others meant killing himself. Matt was entangled in his own web of consequences. Derek discreetly cut himself to draw out the toxin. Meanwhile, Matt recounted his past to Scott. Years ago, the swim team had just won a championship. During the celebration, everyone was drunk, and they threw Matt into the pool. As Matt struggled and cried for help, they just laughed. When Matt woke up, he found himself by the poolside. After all, they wouldn't let him drown. But the coach's response was heartless, mocking Matt for not being able to swim. This incident haunted Matt, causing him to wake up gasping for breath in the middle of the night. Later, he bonded with the Kanima, and his long-harbored desire for revenge became a reality. Matt soon realized that Jackson was his weapon of vengeance. With a mere thought, Jackson would carry out his deadly wishes. After bleeding himself for a while, Derek was surprised to find that he could move his toes. Seemed like it was working. Stiles, ever the Joker, claimed he could move his toes too. Suddenly, the police station plunged into darkness as hunters outside unleashed a barrage of gunfire. In the chaos, Scott managed to break free from Matt and rushed to rescue Stiles and Derek. Derek urged Scott to take Stiles away first, assuring him that most of the toxin was cleared from his system and he'd be back on his feet in no time. Meanwhile, Jackson was convulsing, transforming fully into the Kanima. The hunter duo, father and daughter, joined the fray, boldly deciding to split up. Scott crossed paths with Allison again, but this time they clashed. Allison was out for revenge against Derek, a motive Scott couldn't understand. He had no idea that Derek had bitten Allison's mother to save him, nor did Allison know that her mother had intended to kill Scott, which led to her demise. Later, Chris was attacked by the Kanima, but Allison arrived just in time, shooting an arrow into its head. However, bullets couldn't harm the creature, let alone arrows. Undaunted, Allison engaged the Kanima in close combat, but was soon paralyzed. Matt, controlling the Kanima, spared her sexy life. Stiles' dad had just freed himself from the holding cell when Matt knocked him out. Derek then arrived, with the Kanima following to protect its master. The sight of two monsters battling shattered Scott's mother's understanding of reality. Derek was no match for the Kanima until Scott joined the fight, helping Derek drive it away. In doing so, he revealed his werewolf identity to his terrified mother, who recoiled in shock. Scott hung his head in shame, feeling like a monster in her eyes, and decided it was safest to leave her locked up. Scott later met with Gerard, who had spared Scott's life after discovering his identity. It turned out Scott had been following Gerard's orders all along, including infiltrating Derek's pack as a mole. Scott had even informed Gerard that Matt was controlling the Kanima, all because Gerard had threatened Scott's mother's life. Now, Gerard praised Scott, telling him he'd handled everything well and to leave Matt and Jackson to him, advising Scott to comfort his mother. As Scott was about to leave, he noticed a vial of medicine that Gerard had accidentally dropped. He quickly picked it up and handed it back to Gerard, who had been frequently taking medication. Unbeknownst to them, Derek had overheard their entire conversation. The revelation that Scott was a traitor hit Derek hard, especially since he had favored Scott over his other betas. Matt, on the run, was cornered by Gerard on a bridge. Without a word, Gerard dragged the boy to the river and held his head underwater. It's Matt's worst nightmare. In his final moments, Matt hallucinated seeing the swim team members he had killed. Karma had come full circle and he drowned, unable to escape his fate. Gerard was unaware that Peter, having revived, was watching everything from the bridge. Both men were masters of manipulation, making this a true showdown. Peter smiled faintly as he was in the shadows while Gerard was exposed. However, the turn of events soon made Peter's expression serious. With Matt's death, the Kanima needed a new master, and Gerard was the first to discover it hiding under the bridge. He reached out and established a connection with the creature and seized control of the Kanima. Stiles' father was reinstated as the sheriff. After discovering her son was a werewolf, the mother avoided Scott, who felt deeply hurt. Allison, bent on eradicating the wolf pack, saw her relationship with Scott deteriorate. Stiles appeared to be handling things the best, but his smart and loyal nature made him anxious for his friends and fearful of the coming storm. At dusk, Gerard approached Scott, using the Kanima to control Scott's mother and threaten Scott. Gerard's plan was nearing its final stage, with Scott as a crucial part. However, their dealings seemed to have been exposed, prompting Derek and his pack to go into hiding. Even Scott couldn't find them. Gerard, vowing vengeance for his dead daughter, issued Scott an ultimatum. Meanwhile, Derek and his betas retreated to an old mountain hideout. During a late-night walk, Erica and Boyd heard several unfamiliar howls, seemingly calling out to other wolves. Convinced it was a powerful pack with a stronger alpha, they proposed leaving Derek the next day. Following the weakest alpha seemed futile, constantly on the run. Derek was heartbroken. Scott had just betrayed him, and now his two direct betas wanted to leave. Unbeknownst to Derek, Isaac was also considering his options. Isaac visited the pet clinic to seek advice from the vet and Scott, who were treating a dog. The vet showed Isaac how to use his abilities to help others, like diagnosing illnesses through enhanced smell and sharing a patient's pain with his healing power. These were skills Derek had taught him, revealing that supernatural powers could be used for good. Isaac was moved to tears. Erica and Boyd shared their experience of hearing at least a dozen wolves, suggesting a large pack. Derek scolded them for their naivety, warning it could be a hunter's trap. They refused to listen, preferring to risk finding another pack than stay and face hunters. Frustrated, Derek warned them that once on the run, they'd never stop fleeing. They parted on bad terms. Amid Derek's gloom, Peter finally emerged, timing his appearance perfectly to exploit Derek's disheartened state. He hoped to sway his nephew with some persuasive words, but Derek threw Peter out since he was forewarned by the vet. Isaac confided in Scott about the pack's disbandment and his indecision about leaving, seeking Scott's advice. Scott asked why he trusted his opinion, and Isaac replied that Scott always seemed to do the right thing, earning people's trust despite the burdens of being a good person. This reliability was Scott's charm. Scott didn't make the decision for Isaac, stating he wasn't going anywhere because many people in town still needed him. Isaac, feeling unneeded and unmissed, decided to leave. Before departing, he wished Scott luck in the night's lacrosse game, though Scott was tired of winning through supernatural advantages, finding it meaningless. Isaac then revealed that Jackson had rejoined the team, stressing that as long as Jackson lived, he remained a ticking time bomb. The hockey finals kicked off with tension high. In the locker room, the girly Dany was worried about Jackson, who seemed completely out of it until Dany angrily shouted at him. Jackson snapped out of his trance, looking around in confusion as if he had no idea where he was or what he was doing. Once he came to his senses, he warned Dany to stay away from him. Scott overheard everything and sensed that Jackson would lose control during the game. As was tradition, the quirky coach donned his aviator jacket and delivered a rousing Independence Day-style speech before the finals. Principal Gerard also showed up, announcing that Scott would be benched for failing 3 classes. The coach was disappointed but had no choice. Peter had a rough day, being subjected to Derek's fury from dawn till dusk. He quickly assured Derek he had no intention of taking the alpha position. As Derek raised his hand again, Peter provoked him to hit him more, and that he was a loser, and all his anger comes from self-loathing and failure. Each word struck Derek deeply, draining his will for revenge. During the finals, Stiles, who was supposed to be benched alongside Scott, was unexpectedly called to play by the coach. The surprise was so sudden that Stiles could hardly believe it, and even his father was in disbelief. Stiles made his dad proud for once. As Scott celebrated his friend's luck, Gerard sent a threatening message. If Scott didn't find Derek by the end of the game, Jackson would start a killing spree, targeting Scott's mother and his friends. Meanwhile, hunters were combing the forest, revealing that the wolf howls were a trap. Erica and Boyd fell for it and were now fleeing for their lives. Peter's slow healing showed his powers were waning, prompting him to seek Derek's protection. Derek scoffed, suspecting deceit. Undeterred, Peter continued to persuade his nephew, offering to be the pack's strategist. Stiles' performance on the field was disastrous, embarrassing his friends and family in the stands. The team fell behind, but the coach refused to let Scott play. Isaac, dressed in his uniform, showed up to save the day. He had chosen to stay instead of fleeing with Erica and Boyd. With 4 substitutes ahead, Scott devised a plan for Isaac to intentionally injure his teammates to force substitutions. One by one, the substitutes were hurt and left the field. Gerard noticed Scott's scheme and had Jackson attack and paralyze Isaac. However, Scott's plan succeeded. Short on players, the coach had no choice but to let Scott play. Erica and Boyd were eventually cornered by the hunters. Allison shot Erica without hesitation, ignoring their past friendship. Erica urged Boyd to flee, but he shielded her using his bulletproof muscles, taking arrow after arrow from Allison. Devastated, Erica begged Allison to stop, but Allison continued until Chris intervened, shooting to stop his mad daughter. On the field, Gerard called out to Scott again, surprisingly offering a deal. If Scott helped him capture Derek, he would hand over Allison. The old man would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. After being stopped, Allison showed no guilt, much like her Aunt Kate. Her father scolded her for being ruthless, but Allison argued that this method was more effective. She then called her grandfather to inform him that they had captured 2 fleeing beta wolves. After finally getting on the field, Scott realized Gerard planned to kill Isaac. Gerard drew a sacred sword, ready to cut the boy in half, but Isaac gave a strange smile. Scott had arrived just in time. With Jackson on the field, Gerard was at a disadvantage. After Scott took down a few henchmen, he noticed Gerard had disappeared. On the field, the coach frowned. With Scott gone, the situation turned dire again, and they needed someone to step up. The players clashed fiercely. Stiles stood on the outskirts. Unexpectedly, the ball rolled towards him. He stared at it for a while before snapping out of it, grabbing the ball and running. Everyone chased after him, but by some miracle, Stiles scored. As the crowd cheered, Stiles seemed to find his groove. Using his agility, he darted around the field and scored again, tying the game. Tonight, he was the star. To show his sincerity, Peter revealed the secret to defeating the Kanima. A werewolf's true name represents their self-identity, but the Kanima lack self-awareness, needing a master instead of a pack. Jackson's consciousness was fading beneath the lizard skin. Awakening his humanity was key, but Derek was skeptical, believing no one could reach Jackson's diabetic heart. Peter mentioned Lydia was still connected to Jackson. She was the only one who could touch his heart. After sharing the plan to deal with the Kanima, Peter began advising Derek. He pointed out that Derek was a brute who only used anger to strengthen himself, but lacked emotional depth. This was why Derek always felt the need to fill his void with Scott's qualities. Meanwhile, Stiles led the team to victory, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Amidst the celebration, Scott rushed out to find Jackson standing by the goalpost, his index finger transformed into a claw. As the game ended, all the lights went out, plunging the field into darkness. Chicken screams echoed as people panicked and fled for their chicken lives. When the lights came back on, Scott saw Jackson on the ground, having stabbed himself in the abdomen, lifeless. Lydia was in tears, and Scott and Isaac were stunned, not knowing what had happened. At that moment, the sheriff realized his son was missing. The scene shifts to the two werewolves being bound by the hunters. The Hunter family had been battling them for centuries and knew their weaknesses well. High-voltage currents could suppress a werewolf's transformation. Yet, the Hunters let their hard-earned captives go. After the Kanima Jackson's suicide, a thick liquid seeped from the body bag, noticed only by Scott's mother. Determined to uncover the truth, she insisted on taking it to the hospital for examination. Scott and Isaac tried to track Stiles by scent. They retrieved his clothes and shoes, each taking an item. Meanwhile, Derek arrived with Peter smiling behind him. The missing Stiles had been taken to the Hunter's house where Erica and Boyd were also imprisoned. Gerard had tortured them but hadn't extracted Derek's whereabouts. Stiles threatened Gerard, saying Scott would find him by scent. Trying to boost his own morale, Stiles even described his scent in detail, amusing Gerard. Gerard's reasons for capturing Stiles were twofold: to vent his anger and to warn Scott. Imagining Stiles bloodied would surely drive Scott mad. Stiles taunted Gerard about his age, claiming he could beat him easily. In the next moment, Gerard knocked Stiles to the ground, proving him wrong. Scott felt betrayed by Derek for teaming up with Peter, while Derek accused Scott of betraying him first by allying with the Hunters. Scott quickly explained he was forced to do so because Gerard threatened to kill his mother. Peter chimed in, reminding them he had once used Scott's mother to manipulate him as well. It was Isaac's first encounter with Peter, unaware of his notorious past. They brought a plan to save Jackson, only to learn he had already killed himself. Derek looked gravely at Peter, who seemed deep in thought. Peter shared that if Jackson was dead, it wasn't straightforward, and Gerard had to be behind it. Chris found himself isolated by his father and daughter, a situation all too familiar. His sister Kate had become a ruthless killer under their father's influence. Determined not to let his father take Allison, Chris confronted him about Jackson's suspicious death. Gerard evaded the question, confirming Chris's suspicions. Chris tried to awaken Allison's conscience, but she was consumed by anger, vowing to eliminate all werewolves to avenge her dead mother. In despair, Chris cut the string of her crossbow and went to the basement to disable the electric currents that suppressed werewolf transformations. Jackson's body was transported to the hospital. When Scott's mother unzipped the body bag, she was shocked by what she saw. The fatal wound on the Kanima had not only healed, but its body was also secreting venom, forming a mucus cocoon around it, like a chrysalis undergoing metamorphosis. Meanwhile, Stiles returned home with injuries on his face. To avoid worrying his father, he lied, saying he was beaten up by some thugs. Stiles also kept the incident from Scott, fearing that his best friend's concern would cloud his judgment and hinder their efforts. Swallowing his pride, Stiles decided to bear the burden alone. At the same time, Peter brought Derek, Scott, and Isaac back to the old house and unearthed his family's secret compendium. Just as the Hunter family had their heritage, the Werewolf family had a rich legacy too. However, this was no ordinary book, it was a laptop. Even werewolves had to keep up with the times. The computer contained detailed information on all shapeshifters. Just then, Scott received a call from his mother, informing him of Jackson's transformation. The group decided to split up. Scott and Isaac headed to the hospital, while Peter and Derek stayed behind to investigate Jackson's mysterious death. Unexpectedly, Lydia sought out Stiles, leaving him flabbergasted. He thought his crush was there to check on him, but she only wanted someone to talk to about Jackson. Lydia revealed she still had Jackson's key. Hearing this, Stiles felt a pang of sadness. Jackson, now encased in a cocoon, occasionally twitched as if he might wake up at any moment. Peter and Derek discovered from their research that the Kanima was only Jackson's initial form. When faced with a life-threatening situation, he would secrete venom to form a cocoon and transform into a larger, more deadly flying creature. This was Gerard's plan all along. The description alone sent chills down their spines to their butts. Derek immediately informed Scott to bring Jackson's body to them. He also texted Lydia, succinctly explaining that only she could save Jackson. Lydia intended to go, but Stiles advised against it. He was more concerned about her safety than Scott's plan, since Lydia was his priority. Lydia was moved by his love confession, but once again chose to ignore it, explaining that he had someone he cared about, and so did she. Stiles reluctantly agreed to escort her. As Scott and Isaac moved Jackson's body to the parking lot, Chris arrived in his car. The two sides faced off, but Chris had no intention of fighting. Instead, he shared a long reflection, acknowledging that despite their different stances, they had much in common. Both had principles, loyalty, and were drifting away from Allison. Scott wanted to leave quickly, but Chris insisted they take his Tesla, which was faster. It turned out Chris was there to help, not hinder. Meanwhile, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Gerard woke Allison, announcing that the time had come. At an abandoned factory, Scott and his team met up with Derek. Peter hid in the shadows, rolling his eyes at Derek's dramatic entrance. Chris declared his willingness to let go of past grudges with the werewolves. Lydia, the key to saving Jackson, had yet to arrive. Derek, however, intended to take action immediately, which confused Scott. This wasn't what they had previously agreed upon. It turns out, upon learning about the Kanima's transformation, Derek had abandoned the rescue plan, focusing instead on eliminating the threat quickly. As the two argued, Gerard and Allison arrived, knowing their location somehow. Derek lunged at Jackson, but Jackson, having emerged from his cocoon early, struck first, impaling Derek and tossing him aside. This was part of Gerard's two-pronged strategy, not only to evolve the Kanima into a more powerful weapon, but also to lure Derek out by exploiting Scott's instinct to save lives. During their conversation, Allison shot Isaac with an arrow. Scott hid from her, leaving Chris to face the Kanima alone. The werewolf allies proved unreliable. After exhausting his bullets, Chris was thrown aside by the creature. The werewolves re-entered the battle, surrounding the creature. What seemed like an epic, evenly matched fight turned out to be one-sided. Even though the Kanima hadn't fully evolved, the three werewolves were no match for it. Hiding in the shadows, Peter watched with concern. Once a great boss, he was now the brains and comic relief, leaving the fighting to the younger ones. The outcome was clear. Allison joined the fight, intending to deliver a fatal blow for her mother's revenge, but the Kanima controlled her instead, leaving everyone stunned. Allison looked at her grandfather in confusion. Though Gerard had never revealed his true intentions, Scott had suspected something from their first encounter. A werewolf's heightened senses could detect illness, and Gerard reeked of decay, suggesting that he was dying. It's then revealed that Gerard had terminal cancer. Science couldn't save him, but the regenerative power of a werewolf could. Revenge was just a facade. His true goal was to become a werewolf to heal himself. This explained his constant medication. Reflecting on Allison's mother being bitten by a werewolf, Gerard must have been envious. He had used noble excuses to eliminate Allison's mother while secretly desiring to become a werewolf himself. Chris was furious by the revelation. Gerard looked at Scott, who understood immediately. Their deal had never truly ended. Scott approached Derek, grabbing him by the neck and lifting him. Derek pleaded, warning that Gerard would kill him to seize the alpha power. But Scott ignored his bullshit since he had already made a deal with Gerard. Under Scott's control, Gerard was successfully bitten. The old man, raising his arms in triumph, was about to become what he had fought against all his life. His dignity was lost, but living mattered more to him. Seeing everyone's expressions change from hatred to shock, his smile faded. He hurriedly checked his wound, seeing black blood oozing out, just like Jackson's early transformation, indicating a problem with his evolution. Gerard glared at Scott while Derek looked puzzled. Scott revealed that he had tampered with Gerard's medication during their encounter at the police station, swapping his cancer pills with Rowan Ash, which disrupted the transformation. Gerard began spewing diabetic blood, horrifying everyone. Derek questioned why Scott hadn't told him earlier, feeling he had almost misunderstood him. Scott replied that despite Derek being an alpha, they were not on the same path. Chris felt a surge of appreciation at Scott's words. The dying Gerard, still spewing diabetic blood, screamed for them to be killed. The Kanima, momentarily distracted, allowed Allison to break free. At that moment, Stiles arrived in his car, with Lydia now fully aware of the situation. She approached the Kanima, attempting to reach Jackson's consciousness. Just as the creature was about to attack, it froze upon seeing Lydia's key. Memories of their time together flooded back and Jackson's consciousness took over. Jackson stepped back, opened his arms, and embraced death, refusing to be controlled or kill any longer. Derek and Peter attacked simultaneously, impaling Jackson. Everyone felt a mix of emotions. Allison then noticed Gerard had vanished. The old man's resilience was remarkable. Lydia was sobbing uncontrollably. Stiles took a couple of steps forward to comfort her using his muscles, but stopped in his tracks. Everyone stared in astonishment as Jackson suddenly revived. It reminded them of the entries in the monster manual. The Kanima was a mutation of werewolf genes that could be reversed. In the smoky space, Jackson completed his transformation into a werewolf. It was a happy ending for everyone, except Stiles, who was the saddest of all. Despite Scott forgiving Allison, she insisted on breaking up out of guilt, which felt like a punishment for Scott. Allison reconciled with her father, finally putting an end to the feud between werewolves and hunters. Meanwhile, now free, Erica and Boyd fled through the forest, only to be surrounded by multiple werewolves. The growls alone were enough to terrify them. Elsewhere, the vet and the counselor, clad in leather jackets and pants, looked incredibly cool as they tracked Gerard's whereabouts by following the trail of diabetic blood, helping the werewolves clean up the mess. Peter and his two companions arrived at the old house. He revealed Derek's true motive for building his pack and urgently growing his team. If a new alpha werewolf appeared, it was sure to attract attention from a particular group. The markings on the old house's door signified that the alpha pack had arrived. This was a pack made up entirely of alphas, each of whom had once ruled their own packs. Together, they were unstoppable. Now, they had set their sights on Derek. He had two choices, either to join them or to perish. Unaware of this looming threat, Scott was enjoying a moment of calm before the storm, playing basketball with his best friend. Scott remarked that he felt like he was back to square one, no popularity and no girlfriend. Stiles reassured him, saying that Scott still got him and his life was complete. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.